Sometimes you want to ask your users for information, but asking for it all at once would create a too complex UI. And that's a perfect use case for the wizard. So today I'd like to introduce you to the wizard component of TornadoFX. And to show that, I would like to show you a new customer flow. So what I've done here is to create two views which let you edit parts of a new customer. So the basic data editor will let you input the name of the customer and the type of customer, private or company. And this editor down here will let you enter the address, street, zip, and city. I've already set up some validation in these views, but that's about it. They also inject a customer model, which I've already created. And the hope here is that this customer injected into the basic data editor will be the same injected into the address editor. So that means that these two views are made to exist in the same scope. So let's have a quick look at the UI. So the basic data editor is what we want to be the first page of the wizard. It will ask for the name and the type. And the address editor will be step or page number 2. So let's try to gather these two views in a wizard. So let's create a customer wizard class which extends wizard. The wizard constructor takes two optional arguments, which is the title and the heading. So let's call it create new customer, and the heading we'll set to supply customer information, for example. The only required step in a wizard is that you add the pages you want to display. And you do that with the add function. So let's first add the basic data editor and then add the address editor. So we could run this wizard already. It wouldn't do much in terms of functionality, but it would show us how the wizard is structured. So what we can see here is the title and the heading on top, and on the left side we have a steps description. So it will show the pages added to the wizard, and it will show the currently active page in bold. This can be customized in a number of different ways, and we'll look at that in a minute. So here we have the first page of the wizard, the basic data editor already docked. We can navigate to the next page and see the address editor. By default, the back and next buttons are available whenever there are somewhere to navigate to. It doesn't care about the completed state of the wizard pages by default. Meaning that even though the input in this first page, even though it's not valid yet, I can still navigate to the second page. And that's not what we want in this example, so we're going to change that in a bit. Also, we can call the finish button here, but nothing happens by default. Of course, that's because actually the default functionality of the finish button is just to close the window, but close does nothing when it's the primary view of the application, because this wizard is now opened via the run view function in the IDEA plugin. We'll get back to that also. To make this a bit more easy to understand, I've created a customer list component, which is basically a table view with some of the properties from the customer object. And I've also created an application which uses the workspace and docks this customer list. Let's have a quick look at that. So the list will be backed by a customer list coming from a customer controller. And by default, the controller has two demo customers in it, if you will. So what we want to do now is to create a button up here in the workspace that will call this wizard. So to do that, let's go into the customer list, override on dock, and say that whenever we're docked, we want to access the workspace and add a button to it. And this button will have a title of add, with a mnemonic, so you can access it via Alt and A. And the action for this button will be to call a function in the customer controller that we'll call new customer. So let's go on to create this function inside the controller up here. And we need to find our customer wizard. And we want to operate on this. We'll start by just saying show modal, open modal, I mean. So a wizard is just a normal view, really, but it has some special properties. Let's have a look at the wizard class. It does one thing that you've never seen before, I guess, and that's that it implements instance scoped. Instance scoped means that whenever you call find on something that implements it, a new scope will be created, and everything that is injected inside the component you created will also be part of that new scope. So that means that this customer wizard will find a new version of those two views in the new scope that was created for this wizard. And that gives us a couple of nice features. And that is that we can inject, for example, a customer model in each of these two editors, and it will be the same version. Also, it will not be shared by anything else in your application by default. So we created this add button that calls the new customer function, and the new customer function will now open the wizard. So if we rerun the application, we will see our button. It will call the wizard. We can navigate like before. And now the finish function, whenever we click the finish button, will make sure to close the wizard by default. So let's talk about the functionality of the wizard. Whenever I hit next, a function called onSave in each view, well, in the view that's currently active, will be called. After that, it will investigate the completed property of the wizard page, and if the completed property is true, it will navigate to the next page. And by default, the completed property is always true, so we have to do something about that if we don't want to let the customer navigate to the next page unless we have all we need from the current page. Also, this application is using the customer view model, which is an item view model, and we inject the same instance into both of these editors. And but we want to use validation, so we can't just check the valid state of the whole customer object at this stage, because after after the user enters a name, the only information we can commit is the name and the type, really. So if we try to validate the whole customer at this stage, it would fail, because if you have a look at the address editor, there are required fields in here as well. So we have to utilize a new feature that lets you partially commit a view model. And as we talked about, whenever the next function is called, the onSave of the current wizard page is called. So let's have a look at that inside of the basic data editor first. So let's override onSave here. And what we want to do is, of course, commit this model, but we don't want to commit the whole thing. We want to commit the customer name and the customer type. And commit will return, if we follow this, you will see that it returns a Boolean. So if the commit is successful, a Boolean will be returned. So we can actually on save now say that this page of the wizard is complete if the commit for the name and the type property is performed without issues. So let's rerun now. And let's first try to bring up the wizard and go to the next page without completing this page. Now the validation kicks in. That's what happens when I call commit. So it will validate only those two fields. And since the data is not valid yet, I can't go to the next next page. So let's enter something here and go to the next page. Now I can. And we haven't done anything with the address page yet, so finish would work. Let's do the same for the address editor. So let's first override on save and say that this page is complete if we can commit the street, the city, street, zip, and customer city. Right. So I'm not going to rerun. You understand what will happen. The next thing we could look at is when we're complete. You know, when you've walked through both of these steps, we will have all the information we need. So we're ready to do something about it. And this wizard could act on that data somehow. And what we want to do actually is wherever we call this wizard inside the customer controller, we open the modal, but we also want to configure this wizard so that when it's complete, we want to do something. And what we want to do is to access this the customer that was created and add it to the customer's list. So let's inject the customer model like this into the wizard itself, like this. Now I can access it down here. So I can say that customers add, and then we can access the customer model and the item inside it from the wizard. So this should take care of actually adding the customer to our lists. So let's try this. Now everything is actually working already. That's how easy it is to use the wizard component, but of course it can be configured in many different ways. And let's have a look at a few optimizations that you might want to do to make it easier for your customers. So right now the next button is already available, but we really don't want it to light up before the data in this view is complete. So let's go into the customer model and make sure that whenever you enter something into an input field, it's gonna be automatically committed back to the underlying model object. So inside the customer model, let's add a parameter for each of the bindings to say that autocommit is true. So basically, we will just say that whenever an editor is changed that is bound to any of these fields, we want to flush the data directly back to the underlying customer object. You see this customer model actually instantiates a customer right away. So whenever you make a new customer model, you will also make a new customer inside it. So why did we do that? Well, it turns out that if we have a look at the wizard class again, there are some properties defined in here that says can finish, can go next, and can go back. And these can be customized to improve the visual cues that we give to our users. So by default, the can go next controls if you can hit the next button in the wizard. And by default, it's bound to a property called has next. So whenever there is another page, you can hit the next button. But whenever you hit the next button, you won't be taken to the next page if the current page is not completed, controlled by the completed property of that view. But we can now change this. So instead of saying can go next is dependent on just has next, we can say that we can go next if the current page is complete. That's another Boolean expression that we can use in our wizard. So let's take this and override the can go next inside our wizard. So in here, let's override while can go next and say that, okay, you can go next if the current page is complete. But of course, we now need to set the complete state as you edit, because if we were to run this application now, you see isComplete is only run on onSave. So that would do us no good. We would never be complete. So what we can do instead is to override the complete property, let's see, override val complete inside the basic data editor, and set it to if the customer is valid for customer name and customer type. Actually, we just need customer name since we don't have a validator for the type. It's going to have a value anyway. So now we don't really need to commit at all on save, because whenever we make a change inside here, the data will be flushed, it will be committed if it passes validation. So let's just remove this whole thing. And let's do the same in the address editor. So this page will be complete if the street is valid, the zip is valid, and the city is valid. So I do realize that there are some places in here where we repeat ourselves now. And this is kind of a special case that we need to do this, because we reuse the same model in different steps. If each step had its own model, we could simply say customer valid. We wouldn't need to say which fields inside it we're looking for. It would just be customer valid, and it would be customer commit. And as we don't need to commit here anymore, we're not really, let's see, we're not really repeating ourselves anyway. Okay, so now we made sure that the completed state is bound to the next button, right? So if we run it now, I hit add, next is not available to me until I've completed this page. Let's go to the next, and here it's a bit different, because next is never going to be valid anyway. But of course we said that finish is always available, so it's still going to work. So let's go back to the wizard for a quick second and look at can finish. This expression is bound to the finish button, and by default it's bound to whether well, actually it's bound to true, but we can bind it to if all pages are complete, which is another expression we can reuse. So let's override can finish in our wizard and say this finish button is available if all pages are complete. So now we don't have next, we don't have finish. We enter a name, we go to the next page, still no finish. We can go back if we want to. But once I enter information in all the fields, the finish button lights up. And correspondingly, if we fail validation, the finish button is now not available to us. Okay. So that takes care of the basic flow. I just want to show you some of the things that you can customize inside a wizard. So let's go back to the wizard class, and we'll see that there are properties for some of the textual parts of the wizard, like the heading for steps and the back, next, finish, and cancel buttons. They can all be overridden by calling steps text equals and the new texts. You can also remove the steps header if you want. And you can also make sure that whenever you click a step link directly, it will not commit the model. I forgot to tell you that you can actually use those step links as hyperlinks, but you need to call enable step links first. So let's do that in our customer wizard, and I'll show you what that does. This might not always be desirable, and that's why it's off by default. You see here we have links now, but it will still require us to pass validation. So for me to be able to click address, I need to pass a validation for this first step. This is an optional thing. You can also remove the whole steps display inside the wizard. So if you were to configure show steps, set it to false and rerun, we can remove the whole step part of the wizard. You can do that, and you could have included your own part there. You could also remove this header, for example, and let's say you could create some kind of visualization of the progress of the wizard. Okay, so it's also very easy to add CSS to style this wizard, and it has numerous other customization options as well. I don't want to go through them all. I just wanted to give you a basic overview of the wizard, and we'll come back to some of the more advanced features in an upcoming screencast.